Hi there, welcome to my video on making a leather watch band. In particular, I'll be making a leather watch band for an Apple Watch. So I'm just going to go over the tools necessary and some of the materials. The strap cutter, leather glue, a skiving knife. Of course, the leather we'll be using Horween horsefront in black, phyllo chinois thread, 532 thickness in the Naturel color, Fenice edge paint in black. Also need some stitching irons. These are both 8 stitches per inch with an 8 tine and a 4 tine. A strap end cutter. This is just a standard V point. That's the inner part of leather, inner part of the strap. I use a screwdriver to apply the paint, as you can see. Some beeswax for beveling, for burnishing. A rubber mallet if you care about your tools. This is what happens when you use a metal hammer, because you've gotten impatient. And just to sort of give a brief overview, I've already skived this leather down. So it started at about 4 ounces, and now it's about 1 or 2 ounces. Again, the inner part of the leather, I've cut a tip on this using the V-pointed strap punch. And then the inside leather, this is Horween Essex in English tan. Here's a quick demonstration of the skiving tool that I use. It's got a large metal blade and a metal roller, as you can see. And what you do is you put the leather in between the blade and the roller, and underneath the guard here, as I'm struggling to do, you provide pressure on the lever arm and you pull back on the leather and successfully skive the leather or thin it out. So just moving on, we've skived our leather, and here's a template that I used. It was one of my first prototypes, and I just use it for sizing purposes, just to approximate the size. So as you can see, we've got roughly the correct size. This is where the inner leather attaches to the outer leather, and as you can see, these two match up nicely. The length isn't exactly important, as we'll be cutting it to size later on. And so I'm going to start the gluing process here. This again is the EcoFlow leather weld. It's a water-based glue. You can get it from Tandy Leather Supply. I tend to like it. I've never had it fail on me. It doesn't smell like anything. I know some of the oil-based or solvent-based ones with xylene or toluene are pretty stinky, and I'm working in a basement shop and I don't have very good ventilation down here, so thankfully this one doesn't stink. As you can see on the edge there, I've skived it down to a point, and that's mostly for comfort when you're wearing the watch band. I use this burnishing tool, this wooden burnishing tool, to flatten out the inner piece of leather and spread the glue in between the layers. And I'm constantly looking at each side of the leather to make sure I haven't got any glue on either surface, because it can leave a pretty nasty stain if you let it dry. So I'm just following the contours here of the middle piece of the leather, the one that's in between the inner and outer, and I'm just cleaning up the edges here with a rag. Forming a nice crisp contour is important just for a stylistic sort of point of view, as well as a cushioning point of view. It provides a bit of cushion and prevents the stitches from rubbing up against your skin, which can wear out the stitches and can also be fairly uncomfortable on your skin. So moving on to the buckle side, I tend to go for about 8 centimeters in length after everything's said and done. So we also add about 1.5 centimeters of length to accommodate the fold and the pieces that'll be glued over. So we have a total length of 11 centimeters. And when I'm skiving this and beveling it down, you use the beveled edge of the knife facing the leather and the flat side facing upward. And I'll do this to both ends, and as you'll see in a second, it provides a nice gluing surface. So you can see, just like that. So folding it over, I'm going to check the length now, just to make sure that I've hit the roughly 8 centimeter length that I was looking for. And it seems to be a bit short, so I'm going to unroll the folds just a tiny bit, pull on the leather, stretch it out a little bit, and we're looking at 7.8 centimeters, so close enough in my eyes. And then to size the middle part, the cushion, and the inner lining leather. Just checking fitment, and we'll start the gluing process in just a second here. So this is the same idea as the tail piece, having a bit of trouble with the glue. There we go. And what I mean by same idea is essentially you just want to spread out the leather, make sure it's even, and you want to make sure that there's not too much, because when there's too much it'll bulge out as you're flattening it with a burnishing tool. So the middle cushion portion is in there, seems to be positioned well. Just covering it all in glue now, being fairly liberal, but I don't want to put too much on there. It's sort of a fine line, but if you add too much, then all you need to do is just wipe it up with a rag. It's not a huge deal. Maybe a bit of a waste of glue. Anyway, just coat the edge with some glue of the inner portion, just allowing the edge to really stick really well. And as I mentioned, wiping up any of the glue with a rag tends to help quite a bit, especially from the mat. If you put the unfinished piece of leather on top of glue on the mat, then you'll find that you'll get it all over the surfaces and it'll dry without you realizing it, and then you go to wipe it off and it's left a big stain. So I've been there, it's not very fun. So we just follow the contours and we're almost done gluing. And after gluing, we'll be able to cut the leather to the proper size, measure everything, stitch it up, and then paint the edges. Right now I'm just making sure that the holes are fairly cylindrical, or the passage I suppose, just to allow the pins and adapters to go through easily. And once again I'll use the clamps just to give that nice crease. As you can see on the tailpiece, it's pretty dry. So we're just moving on now, just measuring the width of the band just to ensure that I will get the desired width after stitching and edge paint. So I've measured it to be 24 millimeters, tapering down to just over 20 millimeters at the very tip. This will allow for roughly 22 millimeters in the middle of the band, which is where the buckle will sit when you're wearing the band. So again, I'm using the strap end punch, and I've cleaned it up just a little bit with a skiving knife, and I'm just cleaning out any of the glue outside of the cylindrical hole at the top there. So I've just marked a stitching line, and using my template as a guide, starting to punch my stitches. And if you're interested in seeing how I stitch this up, there's another video that I've made, I'll link it in the description, about saddle stitching. which is the process I've used for this. One thing to note is when you're punching these holes, it's important to put the stitching iron in the last hole that you've already punched, just to ensure that your spacing stays consistent. So again, for the buckle side, I'm measuring 24 millimeters down to a taper, this time to 22 millimeters, and now I'm punching the holes. Once again, using the same method. This is a little bit easier as there's no sharp contours to worry about. I'm also punching a hole which will be used to hold the small part of the buckle that interfaces with the holes on the other tail side. So as you can see, a little bit of time has passed. I've finished the stitching and I'm doing some edge painting here. As I mentioned before, I'm just using an old screwdriver, just a small one, and I'm setting it off camera just to dry for a few minutes in between coats. We're going to do 2 coats and finish off with a burnished beeswax, or rather a beeswax burnishing. So this is sped up at 20 times speed. Each side took just about 9 minutes, I think. And as you can see, it's not quite dry yet. So I'm going to put them there and put the light on. So after some time, I've removed the light. It's ready for the second coat. The second coat tends to go on a little bit easier because there's already something that the glue or the paint can adhere to. Again, being sure not to lay it on too thick. You kind of just want to do nice and thin layers. And if you feel that a third coat or a fourth coat is necessary at the end, then you can do that. Just ensure that you have enough room to add extra coats of paint so that your buckle will still fit. So I'm going to lower the light, let it dry again, and as you can see, they're done. So I'm just explaining here that the beeswax will be used to burnish it. I'm spacing the holes on the tail side using my template, but I'm doing it 6.5 millimeters apart, which I think is a good separation between the holes. I'm punching this with the smallest punch on my rotary cutter, and I'm putting in the space gray adapters for the Apple Watch. These adapters use very small screws to affix themselves, and unfortunately they're pretty prone to being lost. So if you're doing this for an Apple Watch, just be conscious of that. I use a bit of super glue, and of course right here I've lost one of the screws. So I gave it a few seconds or a few minutes to look for the screw, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find it, so I just grabbed an extra adapter. I've got quite a few of them, and I'm gluing the screws. You can use a Loctite thread locking compound, but I find that super glue is the most permanent and tends to work. You really don't need to remove these screws after using them. Here's the buckle I'm using. It's just a standard 22 millimeter brushed stainless steel. They're cheap. They're a few bucks on eBay, or if you could find a supplier, if you have a high enough volume, you can get them for even cheaper. I'm using the black outer layer for my strap keeper here, just cutting it down to size, and I'll punch 4 holes, 2 on each side, and stitch it up. Unfortunately the video cuts off here, but I've got some high quality photos that I'll use, and I'll just do a little bit of a slideshow. So thank you for watching and making it this far in the video, and I hope to see you in future videos. Thanks.